Shalom. Thanks for joining me in Shar's Stories. Today we're talking about the deer. Many mornings I awake and I have no idea what's going to happen to me before I return to bed that night. Well, one unsuspecting morning in 2007, um, while we were still living in Morenci, Michigan, and Morenci is the southeastern part of Michigan. As a matter of fact, my house was the last house on that road in Michigan before you would enter into Ohio. I was like about 50 yards from probably 50 feet away from the Ohio border. Anyway, that morning I got up and I did the usual tasks. I made up my bed. I got breakfast for Winston, who was 9 years old then. Zoe was 8. We homeschooled. I fixed them lunch. I taught more lessons. The usual. And Floyd, my late husband, at that time had retired from Chrysler and was working at a job that he loved. He was a part-time cook and caterer at Sauter Village. It's a historic village in southwest Ohio in the rural town of Archibald. And it was probably about maybe 15 minutes from where we lived. Eric Sauter, he's the guy that invented that furniture where you put it together, the furniture maker. He created a village dating with houses there and things from the 1600s to the 1900s. And Floyd catered for weddings, conventions, and cooked in the Barn restaurant. It was a restaurant that had been redesigned as a restaurant. Okay. So one summer day, and this day, he was scheduled to work at 2 p.m. And a little before 2 p.m., Floyd called. And this was unusual for two reasons. For one, Floyd is not a phone talker. Okay. He just never was. Okay. And second, we didn't have a cell phone. And he frowned on talking on company time. So I immediately knew that something was up. Okay. He explained that he had hit a deer. Floyd was not injured, but the front of the truck was badly dented. He said he had notified the insurance company and that he could still drive the truck. So I immediately called my mama to tell her what had happened. My mother lived in Detroit. Now, a little bit about my mom. She was born in Dollarhide, Alabama in 1930. She was one of 18 children. Only 11 of them survived past 5 years of age, and only 10 of them reached adulthood. They primarily lived off the land that they owned and the meat that they hunted. It was hard times. The family in 1937 moved to Detroit for the jobs in the automotive industry. Henry Ford was paying that legendary $5 a day. However, even in Detroit, there were tough financial times. I was taught by my mom and my grandmother, waste not, want not. They both were hard workers and they know how to reuse, recycle, and to do without. My grandmother would sew her clothes. She would resole her shoes. She raised vegetables. She canned food, all those kinds of things. And before either my mother or my grandmother would throw out any food, it would have to be completely molded or something would have to be wrong with it. Because we had plenty of cheese that had the mold scraped off of it. Nothing went to waste, okay? So now back to the story. When I described the accident, this deer accident to my mom, she asked a question I hadn't even thought about. She said, "Did you get the meat off the road?" I said, "No, I didn't even think about that." She said, "Girl, that's good deer meat. You better go get it. Go get it before it gets too hot in the sun and it bloats up." I said, "Okay, let me off the phone and I can find out where it is and call the meat processor. I'll call you later." So I went into action. I love having a project that's adventurous, novel, or unusual, or different. And if you listen to any of my stories, you know what I'm talking about. Okay. So first I called the meat processor. They said I'd have to have the deer there by 4:30 p.m. with a tag from the police saying that the deer was accidentally killed. It was midsummer and no deer hunting was allowed at this time. So the processor had to cover themselves by having proof that the deer was legal for them to handle. The processor was near Homer, Michigan. It would take me about an hour or more to get there. Okay. Second, I need to get Winston and Zoe psychologically ready to help me. They had eaten deer meatloaf and they loved it. I was concerned about them getting squeamish about picking up a dead deer. Okay. So I explained to them, your dad hit a deer. We're going to get it and we're going to take it to the meat processor. I need you both to help me lift it off the road and put it in the van. I don't want to hear you talk about you can't do it or it's too heavy. Do you understand? Because we're going to do this. They both chat. Yes, ma'am. We understand. Winston added, come on, Zoe. Here we go again. So I said, okay. Both of you use the bathroom, get your water bottles, your rubber boots, your work gloves, meet you in the van. Okay. Next, I needed Floyd to tell me precisely where the deer was and to get his approval for this project. Okay, a little note on Floyd. Floyd was a city guy, and the thought of picking up roadkill and eating it was just beyond his stretch of imagination. He came from a family with no pets or animals or nothing, so eating roadkill it wasn't gonna compute. Okay, so I stood there holding the phone in my hand. Okay, trying to decide the best way to approach him. I knew it was nothing that was gonna magically work, so I just decided let's just go for it. Needless to say, Floyd couldn't believe I would call his job and pose such a preposterous notion. But see, I knew I had him in a bind because he couldn't yell at me when everybody in the restaurant kitchen could hear his conversation. Because ain't nobody hitting their cell phones. It's just that one phone hanging on the wall in the kitchen there. He finally realized he couldn't talk me out of it, so he acquiesced and told me exactly where the deal was. Later that evening, Floyd did tell me that his co-workers, when he told them that his wife was going to get the deer that he had hit, they all applauded, because he worked with country folks who knew the value of fresh roadkill. He said, I think their attitude helped him not to have a hissy fit when he got home and saw the mess that was going on in the kitchen. But I'm getting way ahead of the story. Okay. So now I needed the police to meet me at the deer on County Road 23 in Archbald, Ohio. The dispatcher reassured me officer would meet me, but in the rural areas, the number of paroling police are very few. Okay, so before leaving the house, I put a large tarp in the back of the van to put under the deer. Okay, when we got to Archbald, I saw the deer on the side of the road and realized it was a fawn. It still had spots on it. It looked like it weighed about 80 pounds. Okay, now this is my basing this on. We had a dog. It was a collie and a retriever named Riley who weighed about 55 pounds. So I figured just deer weighed a little bit more than that. Okay, just saying. So I called the dispatcher several times to check on the whereabouts of the officer. He arrived about 3:30 and gave me the necessary tag for the deer processor. Okay. I'm saying I'm calling him. So I wonder how I was calling him. I must have been a payphone nearby or some business or something that was nearby because I ain't have a cell phone. Okay, now I couldn't believe when he did get there. This is a muscular young officer. He sat in his squad car and watched a 59-year-old woman, a 9-year-old boy, and an 8-year-old girl, expertly, I might say, lift the fawn and deftly place it in the back of the van. Not that we needed help, but just the idea of him not offering to help. I guess he figured we were country folks and we didn't need any help. Okay, who else called the police to come and tag roadkill? Okay, they got this. Well, I was glad it wasn't heavier than what it was, and ever so proud of Winston and Zoe. There wasn't a peep of complaining from them. However, it was too late to get the file to the processor before closing time, and when I called, the worker there suggested I clean out the deer, pack it with ice, and bring it in the next day, Saturday. That would be Sabbath, so that meant me keeping it until Monday. Even though I had two refrigerators in the freezer, this file was not going to fit. So what to do? So when I'm in a pickle, I often recall the stories and exploits of the pioneers and the pilgrims. Okay, their creativity of making something out of nothing and their fortitude would inspire me to courageous heights. Okay, now these same stories, when I would try to use them to persuade Floyd, produce comments like, "Share, I don't care what the pioneers did. I'm not a pioneer. I ain't doing it." Okay, so I'm thinking to myself now, Laura Ingalls, Mom Pa Ingalls, I know they'd be proud of me because I figured if they could do it, I know I can process a deal. So I headed to the store for large black garbage bags and ice. The ice was to keep the farm cool while I was working on it, and the black bags were for the innards. And I thought just to throw the intestines to the cats. I had at least 10 outdoor cats. People would bring me cats, and would just drop them off. Sometimes they'd even tell me they would drop them off. But anyway, I ended up with a lot of outdoor cats, and it was fine. So but not in the house. Okay. But if they didn't eat it all, other wild animals would be attracted to the house. I figured I better put it in a plastic bag. So I stopped at the small grocery store in Fayette, Ohio, and I spoke to Alan. And Alan was somebody who was part of a congregation that I had used to go to. And he was thin, white, mild mannered countryman in his late 50s. Very mild mannered guy. And I'm so excited. I'm telling him about the deer I'm going to process. And he says, Sharon, be sure you take out the muscling. Muscling? What muscling? He said, the gland near its leg. So I said, is the muscling on the inside or the outside of the deer? So at that point, he just said, Sharon, where's the deer? So I said, it's in my van in the parking lot. He said, okay, let's go look at it. Now, I knew for sure the Pa Ingalls and even my Ingalls probably knew more than I did about processing the deer at this point, especially when Alan, who was on his job, walked off his job to help me out, and we on our way to the parking lot. Okay, look at this. When he surveyed the situation, he didn't even try to give me instruction. He just said, you see that White House over there across the street? Go over there, knock on the door, and ask them to help you. They shoot deer and they do their own processing. I was relieved, thankful, and 50 other adjectives. The fear that might have entered some folks' mind about knocking on a stranger's door only entered my mind for like 1/3 of a second before it swiftly kicked out the thought that because I needed help. Okay. Well, the three of us jumped in the van and pulled into the driveway. All three of us went to the door. My children didn't want to miss any part of this adventure, okay? Living with me, they hadn't had much of a chance to develop normal fears like, anxieties or something like that. They just going, okay? Two guys and a woman came to the door. I explained the situation to the older looking guy. He was a country boy, mid 30s. He said, what you gonna give me for it? Okay, so I figured if I use some of their vernacular, it might help me with my negotiation. So I said, what you want? He said, a hind quarter. So I said, that's fine. Okay. I was so relieved he didn't want money because I didn't have much on me. So that was a blessing. Then I was amazed at how fast those guys worked. Within 45 minutes, they had cleared a spot in their garage, threw a rope over the main beam, hung up the fawn, split the fawn open straight down the middle, removed the entrails, rinsed it off with a hose, packed it with the ice I had bought, and put a bungee cord around it to hold the ice in place. I was mesmerized at their skill, and my eyes was glued on the process. Now, Winston, he had moved to the rear of the garage in hopes of avoiding seeing too much, because this ain't none of his cup of tea at all. None, okay? But Zoe was right there next to me, tugging at my clothes. Mama, Mama, the Fonz mom and daddy are looking for him. They're going to be sad when they can't find him. So I said, Zoe, deer aren't like people. They'll look for a while, and then they'll be all right. I sure hope that was the truth. Okay. She said, Mama, Mama, the mom and daddy will be real sad. I just know they will. They won't be able to find their baby. So I said, okay, we'll pray for the mom and daddy. Dear Heavenly Father, we pray for the Fonz mom and daddy. Please help them not to miss their baby so much and help them to overcome their grief and be happy again. Amen. Thanks, Mama. And so I said. Then she snuggled into me and we continued to watch the process. Okay. The guys asked me to come back around about 8:30 that evening. They had to let the deer hang for a while to let the blood drain out. Then they could cut it up. And the woman pulled me aside and asked me to bring back some Ziploc bags so I could put the meat into it. Somewhere in these exchanges, there was a really big communication gap. Okay? So a couple hours later, I was so excited and wondering what was going on with the fun that I decided to go back early to give them the bags so they could put the meat into them instead of me having to transfer the steaks, the rolls, the chunks of meat, the stewed meat and stuff like that into the Ziploc bags. Well, when I went back, the older guy met me in the driveway. He said the meat was ready. He directed me to a large black bag surrounded by ice that he had put into like a thermos freezer kind of thing. I peeked into the bag and there were huge sections of deer. I thought, where are the tiny chunks of stew meat, and the beautiful steaks? that I can just organize and put in my freezer. But I was too shocked or too embarrassed to protest. He never said he was going to chunk up the meat. The woman inferred that he would, and I just said, "Thank you, I appreciate this." Now my mind is really spinning now. On the good side, even though I have the deer in 5 large sections, 3 legs and 2 rib sections, each section will fit on a refrigerator shelf, okay? Because I had 2 refrigerators in my kitchen, so I could put most of the stuff over on one and then still have this refrigerator for the deer. The downside was I had large sections of deer that needed to be cut up. I had no idea what was shoulder, what was chuck, what was steak, what was whatever. When I got home and opened the bag, my mind was swimming. The pieces were enormous. I couldn't even let Floyd in my brain at this point. I just, like, what was I going to do? Now, I tell you, I hate confusion, especially in my own mind. So I quickly decided it really don't matter for me that I have to determine what was steak or stew meat or prime cuts. It don't really matter, okay? So my plan was to put each used section into a separate bag and work on the deer bag by bag. If it looked like a steak, it got cut into a steak shape. The hard part was trying to cut off all the odds and end pieces, and my Ginsu knife just wasn't cutting it, okay? Later, when Floyd walked in from work, the kitchen was a mess. He must have felt a deep spiritual sympathy for me. He just looked and began to help, although he did say, "Sharon, if you decide to do something like this again, don't count me in." After 3 evenings of work, we finally got it all done. We tossed the antique meat grinder aside when it kept getting plugged up. We used a food processor, and it was a whole bunch of chunks of meat, and we just ground it up in the food processor. I browned some of the ground deer meat with onions, garlic, and Italian seasonings, and then had a taste test. No one could tell the difference between the deer meat and some beef that I had browned, so I mixed it all together and made spaghetti sauce. With the remaining raw deer meat, I mixed it with raw beef and made lots of meatloaves. The following week, I decided to barbecue the ribs. Okay, the ribs were so tiny, and it was very little meat, but I did my best. Okay, at the table, Winston and Zoe just refused to eat them. They looked too foreign, and Flora and I, had them on our plate, and we kind of picked at them with our forks, and finally admitted we couldn't eat them either. It just couldn't, because it looked like a little deer. Okay, so after dinner, I phoned my mom. I said, "Mom, Flora and I couldn't eat the ribs. Psychologically, we just couldn't eat them. It reminded us too much of the fun. The meatloaf is different because it don't look like part of a deer." My mama quickly said, "Listen, you all saved them ribs for me. I ain't got no psychological problem." I hope you've enjoyed this story. But there's 3 morals to the story. Okay, because a lot was going on here. The first one is from Ralph Bunche. He's a Nobel Peace Prize recipient, and he was born in Detroit in 1903. As a matter of fact, my grammar school was named after him. He said, "You can surmount the obstacles in your path if you are determined, courageous, and hardworking. Never be faint-hearted. Be resolute, but never bitter. Permit no one to dissuade you from pursuing the goals you set for yourself. Do not fear to pioneer, to venture down paths of endeavor." All right. The next one is from Franklin Delano Roosevelt. "Courage is not the absence of fear, but rather the judgment that something else is more important than fear." And then the Apostle Paul tells us in Philippians 4:13, "I can do all things through Messiah who strengthens me." Thanks for joining me today. And remember to like and share and subscribe if you haven't already. Shalom.